Shalom. I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz, speaking to you from the pulpit of Temple Israel in Norfolk, Virginia. I'll be speaking with you now about the great pandemic Purim debate of 5781, which is, of course, this year. Life involves interaction with the environment. Now, this is true for groups as well as individuals. Some people minimize their social contact, and some groups adopt an inward focus. But inevitably, the world in which they live plays a role. I'll be speaking to you about a group of very traditional Jewish men and women known as Haredim. The Hebrew word Haredim actually means tremblers, those who are trembling at the word of the Lord. And it refers to the fervently Orthodox on our spectrum of Jewish observance. One might think that the Haredim would be more or less the same wherever they live. And we would be wrong to think that. The reason why we would think that is that Haredim consciously minimize their interaction with the outside world. And in fact, there are broad similarities between the Haredi communities of Israel and those in the rest of the world. But this week, we saw a startling difference between the Agudath Yisrael of America, which is the leading organization of the fervently Orthodox, of the Haredim in this country, and the Haredim of Israel. Let's learn what happened, and then let's analyze it. We have just begun the Hebrew month of Adar. In under 2 weeks, we will celebrate the holiday of Purim, the Feast of Esther. This is a kind of Jewish Mardi Gras. The mood and the behavior can oscillate between happy-go-lucky and positively giddy. Large crowds eating and drinking in close proximity with fellow congregants, neighbors, and friends. Spirited socializing. This is the order of the day. In Orthodox circles, and all the more so in fervently Orthodox gatherings, the traditional relaxation of restriction against heavy drinking can go to extremes. How will Purim be celebrated in 5781? The Haredim in Israel do not seem to be in the mood to curb their enthusiasm. They have repeatedly flouted Israeli laws mandating staying at home or severely limiting the size of public gatherings. At a recent funeral of a Haredi rabbi in Jerusalem, an estimated 10,000 men crowded together. Most were without masks or wore their masks improperly. To compound to the tragic irony of that situation, the man whose death they were mourning, Rabbi Soloveitchik, had died of COVID-19. We don't have to wonder if this reckless disregard of public health guidelines will have dire consequences. It has been a plague within Haredi communities in Israel for the past year. A few statistics. 1/3 of the coronavirus cases in Israel have arisen within Haredi circles, despite the fact that Haredim make up only 1/8 of the population. Now, in the second wave of infections, a wave that began in the late spring after widespread disregard of the quarantine restrictions, in conjunction with the Jewish wedding season of May and June. The primary source of higher infection rate in Israel's hardest hit localities derived from the percentage of Haredim in that municipal population, and not just the density of settlement of a given city. 48% rather than just 9% of the increase in infection was attributable to a large number of Haredim living in a given community. Moreover, despite Israel's world-class success in vaccinating its citizens, Haredim are lagging badly behind secular and moderately religious Israelis. 90% of Israel's citizens over age 60 have received at least one dose of vaccine, but only 66% of Haredim. If we include younger age brackets, 29% of the Haredi population has been vaccinated, compared to 42% of other Israeli Jews. The outlook for Israel over Purim is very challenging. Israel's corona czar, Nachman Ash, has briefed journalists writing for fervently Orthodox publications, and he's called for a responsible celebration of the holiday. He reminded them that there was an outbreak after the holiday of Chanukah, when Haredim ignored his similar words of caution. But as of now, we do not see that the Haredim in Israel, as a whole, are likely to adopt life-saving changes of behavior. That is because only a few of the revered rabbinic leaders of the Haredim have urged prudence. Those few are acknowledged Torah sages, but they're only a few voices. And other, equally distinguished rabbis continue to treat the situation not as a crisis of overriding importance, but simply as one more skirmish in their unending war to avoid making compromises with the State of Israel. A recent responder to a blog written by a modern Orthodox Zionist leader, David Weinberg, put it succinctly. He wrote, "Understand, the State of Israel is as legitimate in Haredi eyes as the Ottoman Empire or the British Mandate was 100 years ago, which is to say, not at all." By contrast, consider the recent guidelines for Purim issued by the Agudath Yisrael of America. And they write, "Community banquets, festive meals, or other gatherings, even with appropriate precautions, should be avoided. Synagogues should consider adding extra sessions of Megillah readings." Megillah is the scroll of Esther. "To ensure that everyone can hear the Megillah without dangerous overcrowding. Both givers and collectors of charity funds, tzedakah, in each community should minimize contact and social interaction. You should know that the giving of charity is a Jewish high-ranking commandment all year long, but even more so on Purim. Yeshiva students should not go out in groups to collect money. Instead, they should set up a phone bank where the students can call the supporters of the parochial school for donations. We should limit our exchange of food parcels, that's another holiday custom, and minimize social interaction with the people to whom we give. The same regulatory body also urged a much more restrained celebration with respect to the consumption of alcohol. And they say, unrestrained use of whiskey and other alcoholic beverages is entirely inappropriate. Heads of households should not serve any alcoholic beverages, including wine, to groups of students visiting their homes. Drivers must not consume any alcoholic beverages, including wine. Nobody should enter a car if there is reason to believe that the driver is under the influence of alcohol. So there we have two examples of fervently Orthodox groups behaving in very different fashions. Why the change? Are not American ultra-Orthodox Jews as engaged with their traditional religion as their Israeli cousins? The difference is in the differing political climate within which each group functions. That's the environment. In Israel, the ultra-Orthodox are canny players in the game of coalition politics. Although they do not have ultimate respect for the state of Israel, they trade their political support for concessions and for special favors in many matters, including those that constitute a burden to Israeli citizens as a whole. This situation has produced grave tension within Israeli society, and the current health crisis has made a bad situation much worse. In America, on the other hand, the political system does not reward fringe political parties. So American Haredim cannot play that card. The Agudath Yisrael guidelines also reveal a sensitivity to public opinion that doesn't have much force in the power politics of the Israeli system. The American group's guidelines begin with a statement acknowledging the importance of public relations for a minority such as themselves. Quote, "It is critical to remind ourselves that the eyes of the world are upon us and will likely be watching us closely this Purim. Acting appropriately is always important, how much more so this Purim." Finally, since we are considering this news in a religious framework, let us ask ourselves, which of the ultra-Orthodox parties is following the teachings of the Jewish religion as we understand it more authentically? Flouting life-saving regulations and rioting when the police come to enforce them? Or reluctantly but publicly telling one's followers to behave with greater concern for public health and public opinion? The answer is clear. For Purim and on every other day, Judaism teaches, "Uvacharta v'chayim," you shall choose life. A good, a healthy and safe Purim to all.